All right, welcome. Happy Wednesday. We're having a little bit of spring weather back. We'll get summer, I think, back in a few days. I just wanted to start by mentioning one thing, since some of us were talking about backgrounds before everyone got on. And Zoom does have a way of not allowing, it says you can turn off personal backgrounds so that
virtual backgrounds,
sorry, yes, you turn off virtual backgrounds. And I was perplexed with this because I think of that as a security setting, because in theory someone could put a background picture up there that's distracting or inappropriate in some way, and I wanted to turn off virtual backgrounds, but people were still able to use them. And what I discovered is that turning off virtual backgrounds turns off your own ability to put up a virtual background. That there is no way to disallow other people from putting up personal backgrounds, even if you are the host. And the user conversation that was about this acknowledged how silly that seemed. Why would I need to turn off my own ability to do something? I should just not do it. But that's the way it is. I suppose the Zoom people have more important fish to fry at the moment, to use an idiom. So that's it, in case you were wondering, or get to wonder at some point. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. In the first session, we worked on navigating the student screen, toggling back and forth, sharing, seeing faces while we were sharing, and we went through one sample lesson. So today, excuse me, we're going to talk more about the Zoom host tools, what looks different for the host. And I know a number of you have been hosts before, and I don't know how much you've explored some of these tools that you'll have at your disposal. So we'll do that. And we'll talk about teaching tools and go into another sample lesson. And you'll get a chance to practice with these tools as well. So the teacher's screen, which is the Zoom host in this case. I'm sorry, can you hold on just a second? Sorry, usually I appreciate people putting away dishes, but you know, I recognize you don't all need to hear it.
Yeah.
All right, so when you are the Zoom host, the toolbar at the bottom of your screen looks a little bit different than when you're a participant. And these are the things that are different, identified by the red arrows, and we will walk through them. So the first one we'll talk about is this participants button. And you have a participants button. When you're the host, your button gives you a few more options than the participants get. You have this more button. You can, if someone doesn't have video on, we have a couple of people, I could send them a note. I could click on their name and have it send them a pop-up saying, please turn on your video. If someone is muted, I can do the same thing, saying, please turn on your audio. Now, this gives me the opportunity to mute. This student was not muted. I can also, generally, if I mute somebody, I have been able to unmute them. Zoom says that in their current release, for privacy considerations, whether the participant mutes themselves or the host mutes them, the host cannot unmute them. The host would have to ask them to unmute themselves. Now, I haven't found that to be strictly true. I still have the option, seem to have the option to unmute themselves, but I've heard that other people don't always. So that could be something that's in transition. You may find if you mute a student that you have to get them to unmute themselves. I can make someone the host. And actually, if I do make someone the host, I do have the capability to get the hostship back from them, which Didn't used to be the case, so it was a little bit scary. I can, yes.
I have a question on making someone a host. You said that a co-host doesn't really share much power. And this is a real specific situation, so I'll just try to do it really quickly. If you're the host and you're hosting a meeting, but you want to temporarily give someone else the ability to go into breakout sessions, would you just make them a host? And then they could do that, and then you would just take it back when you wanted to resume?
You want to give them the ability to move around from one breakout session to another?
Yeah.
Yes, you would have to make them the host, and you can do it this way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then afterwards, you could go back to their participant profile and reclaim the host. So you become host again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. You can rename them. So you all know how to rename yourselves. I could rename you also. And with students, I do this a lot. I have chosen not to, especially initially, not to teach my students a lot about the mechanics of Zoom. For so many of them, just getting online, getting to class is scary enough and hard enough. And you think, oh, it's easy once you get online. But it's really, for a lot of students, it's kind of an alien environment. And if they're on phones, it looks a little different than if they're on tablets. And I really believe that technology should be as low. We want our classes to be as low barrier as possible. And so I'm not teaching them anything. Once if they can get to class, great. The first thing I will, if I'm going to teach them anything, it will be mute and unmute. And you've seen screenshots, I think, or I sent you links to screenshots, which you can share with them to help them do that. But in the interest of making things low barrier and as easy as possible, if someone comes in with a screen name that's not theirs, or not, it has initials on it, or it has, sometimes it has their phone number on it, I will just go and change it for them. It's just easy. I have one student who always shows up, her screen name is Audrey. Well, now I know that that's her son's name. So I will just change it to Oksana. Very easy. And you can do that. Everything that you can do here, you can also do here in the video boxes. You have, see this, now this screenshot is a little bit old, so you might not see the unmute anymore. But you click the 3 dots or the more next to someone within someone's box, and you can do the same list of things. You can remove people, and we'll talk about that more when we talk about security, but that's an option if there's someone who shouldn't be in your class or is being very disruptive. Non-video participants, these are people whose videos is turned off. If you don't want to see them on your screen because you want to make everyone else bigger. Personally, if I don't see people on my screen, it's easier to forget about them, so I don't use that. Put in waiting room. Normally the waiting room is used when we come into a Zoom meeting, right? Just as a security, you know who's coming into your meeting before, or into your classroom before they actually come in. I have found another use for the waiting room, and that is, excuse me, at the end of class, sometimes I want to have a conversation with another teacher, with an assistant who's with me, or with an individual student. And sometimes other students just won't leave, either because they can't figure out how to leave, or because there's something going on. They want to hear what it is. So if there are students left when I'm trying to wait around and I'm tired of smiling and waving and wanting to have a private conversation, I'll just put those other people in the waiting room. And from the waiting room, they can leave and at their leisure, or figure out how to leave, or turn their phone off, or whatever they want to do. So another use of that. Yeah.
Linda, you were talking about mute, and I can do that, but I've noticed on this one, sometimes when I click on the 3 dots, it says pin video. What does that mean?
Pin video, as someone in this class pointed out on Monday, I think, that would have been Monday, Pin video, if you are in speaker view and I'm talking, but I pause for a second and somebody else coughs or clears their throat, they are going to come up front and center on your video screen. But if I'm presenting and you don't want to see all the people who have a little background noise going on, you can click pin video and it will always have whichever. If you click pin video while I'm up there, then I will remain on your screen.
Linda?
Okay. I'm in, I'm in gallery view where
So
it's in video.
Amy?
I was going to mention, I've had the experience where students are using a phone and it has such limited ability to see people that if I'm not, if I'm sharing my screen and I have a slide that I want everybody to be discussing or working from, as soon as somebody else starts talking, they can't see the slide anymore. So I haven't figured out how to explain to them yet how to pin the video, but I think that pin video would be a really, especially for people working on phones, that'd be a really good tool to have.
Yeah, that sounds great. Actually, I could make some screenshots of that and we could put them up, and maybe the screenshots would help explain to students how to do it.
That'd be great.
So I guess you can see that when you're in gallery view also, Nancy, but it's whoever's talking. So wherever the box is. Other questions? Kathleen, did you have something? No?
Can
Okay.
I make a comment, Linda?
Yes,
One
please.
thing I learned the hard way when I first started doing Zoom is that, how the classes are timed, and I was not using my waiting room at first. And so for people who have not done the classes before, the waiting room really helps you make sure everybody starts on time, because Zoom starts timing the classes as soon as 2 of you are in the classroom.
Oh.
And I always had a third person who would be much later than everybody else, and that would eat up like 10 minutes of our class time. And then I learned about the waiting room, and that fixed that problem. So for people who are new to Zoom, it's a very valuable tool.
So if you are working on a free account, you're limited.
I am working off of a free account.
Yeah, you're limited to 40 minutes. And I'll talk a little bit more about the free versus paid, but you're limited to 40 minutes if you have more than 2 people on a meeting. And so that's a valuable thing to know. Other questions?
So I have a question. As a host, you're the only person that can change the names?
The host, as well as, so you can change your own name.
I can change.
Or I can change my name, or I can change your name.
But only as a host, I can do that.
No, well, every participant can change their own name.
So there isn't a universal participant list then, is there? If you change Audrey's name so you understand it better, then does that show up to me as well? Or, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, so your name shows on screen.
On screen.
Right now. So everyone can watch Chris's name, and I can go in and change it. Okay. And now everybody sees just Chris.
Okay. Okay.
And I can change Bonnie. As a host, I can change anybody's name. As a participant, you can only change your own name.
Okay. But they will, okay, I got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
other questions?
Is that only for the current session?
Yes.
So next class, you'd have to go in and change Audrey's name again.
Every class I go in and change Audrey to Oksana. Yeah. A lot of people are sharing their technology with their children, when children are at school remotely. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about that's different is when you are host, you have a little up arrow next to your share screen button. And when you click that up arrow, it affects your screen sharing options. So it's interesting the order they put things in. When I click the up arrow, this is the menu I get. One participant can share at a time, or multiple participants can share simultaneously. I have never actually used this. I'm not sure why, especially if you have students on their phones, why you would do that. But if you click this advanced sharing options, you get this pops up. And this is what's most valuable, because this is where you can say who can share. This in your settings, in your Zoom settings, you can set the default, decide whether you want the default to be that everyone can share or only the host can share. Just as a security precaution, I have my settings set to only the host can share, but within a meeting at any time, I can click the little arrow next to my green button and allow all participants to share. This restriction does not affect breakout rooms. So even if I have it set to say that only the host can share, when you are in a breakout room, everybody can share. So I don't know if you call that a feature or a bug, but that's the way it is. All right. Okay. The record button, everyone has a record button. The host, if you are on a paid account, can choose to record in the cloud. So in your Zoom account, there's an option that says recordings, and the first level of paid account gives enough storage space to store 2 or 3 hours of recordings. You can go in there, you can download them and do anything you want with those recordings. If you're on a free account or you're a participant, you can only record on your own computer. And when you finish the meeting, the screen will pop up showing you where that recording is. The host can, in my settings, I can disallow personal recording of the meeting. So just another option. Questions?
So Linda, so a participant can record even if the host is not recording?
As long as the participant allows that, yes.
As long as the host
I'm sorry,
allows it.
yes, as long as the host allows that.
And does the little recording thing show up in the corner?
If a participant is recording?
Yeah.
I don't know. You want to try it? Do you have a record button?
No, I don't.
Ah, that's because I disallowed recording.
Oh, Linda.
Sorry. That's good to know. Next, okay. So Rosemary's phone was ringing. I just muted her, and I do have the option to unmute her. So it's interesting what Zoom says that I shouldn't be allowed to do that, but I still can. Not everything's in process, I suppose.
And in your email yesterday, you said that you needed to link the audio part, or that you had to do something separate with the audio part to get it show on the recording. No? All right, never mind. Because when I played the recording, I didn't get audio. Did other people?
I think it was when sharing, you have to enable other people to hear what's going on.
Okay,
That's what she was talking about.
I'll go back again and look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, there's another checkbox to share audio as well as the screen you're sharing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's see. So security. So we're going to talk about a number of security features, and then I'm going to ask you to go into breakout rooms and talk about these security features and the pros and cons, because like a lot of things, the things that seem to make us more secure also may pose barriers for our learners. And there are trade-offs to be made in that regard. If we want things to be as low barrier as possible, that might entail taking a little bit more risk, and everybody has to assess that risk for themselves and what they're comfortable with. I can tell you that I have been teaching on Zoom probably on average 8 to 9 class hours a week, 8 to 10 class hours a week for the last 3 months, and I have not had any security issues. I know that that's a small drop in the bucket compared to what Zoom has used. And their most recent Rev version 5, which everybody is on version 5 because the earlier versions don't work anymore, has encryption so that our communications are all encrypted. Still with that, everyone has to make those security decisions for themselves. So there is a button. This button appeared sometime at the end of April in the Zoom Rev called Security. And when you click on that, as a host, these are the options that you get. You can lock the meeting. If I were to lock the meeting now, no one else would be allowed in, which would have been a problem for whoever just joined. Enable the waiting room, again, so you can see who you're letting into your class before you actually let them in. Allowing or disallowing people from sharing screens, using chat, or renaming themselves. I think we talked on Monday when we were talking about chat that chat has the ability to share files through chat, and I just have that turned off. I just do not want to worry about someone inadvertently sharing a virus or something with anybody else, assuming it would be inadvertent. And we're running classes with people that we know, right? We're not running big open meetings, and so some of these things are less important, but still good to think about. Chat also, you can set it as a host so that people can, as you now all have the ability to send a chat message just to me or to everybody. I could enable you to participants or students to send chat messages to one another. So for Gina to chat only with Bonnie, or Krista to send a chat only to Rosemary. And if you click on the chat button now, you'll see that you don't have that ability. That's something I've turned off. It's not so much of that I'm thinking of it as a security risk for the students that I know. I just think it's a distraction. Don't need students to be, it's hard enough to rally students' attention without thinking that worrying about them sending messages to one another and having to respond to that. And same thing, renaming themselves. That's not something I'm worried about here with students that I know.
Linda, I have a question about the doorbell. Is that when somebody enters the waiting room, or is that when they join the meeting?
If you have waiting room enabled, the doorbell rings when they enter the waiting room.
The waiting room, okay. So it's an auditory. If you're in the middle of class, you have the waiting room set up, that lets you know that there's somebody that you have to allow in.
Right, okay. Exactly. And you can turn the doorbell off, or you can set the doorbell to so that only you hear it. Personally, I find the doorbell a little bit distracting, and I think, well, maybe everyone should know what I'm being distracted about. Let everybody hear that doorbell, or else sometimes it just makes me crazy and I turn it off completely. Okay. There are more security-related options in the participant screen, particularly this mute button, which sometimes is the fastest to get to. And again, these you can also get to in the video boxes. And sometimes it's easier to figure out who's talking if you see that person and you want to mute them. You can remove them also. Something to remember about remove: if you are running a class with a recurring meeting that has been set up as a recurring meeting, you can set in your settings that if you remove someone, they're not allowed back in, or if you remove someone, they are allowed back in. If your settings say that if you remove someone, they're not allowed back in, and you have a recurring meeting, I don't know whether that's permanent. I haven't tested that. So if a student's being really disruptive today and I remove them, are they going to be able to get into class on Wednesday? We have to test that. I haven't found the answer to that question. So it's just remove. If it's a student that you know they're being disruptive, muting them is probably a better option. It's a less permanent option. Questions? Okay, so we've talked about waiting rooms. Oh, passwords. My advice on passwords: keep it simple. I had a teacher tell me, my students can't manage the password, and the password was something like small w, capital R, then a 6, then, right. Locking the room, the doorbell, disallowing, we've talked about those things. And so here is your question. And if you could take a picture, if you have your phone nearby, if you can take a picture of the screen so you have the options. So this is what I'd like to you to talk about. What difficulties could each one cause for students, and which ones would you use or not use?
Linda, I have one question before we break out real quick.
Yeah.
For the passwords, I've always just used the passwords that Zoom provides, which are those funky ones with, you know, that you were talking about. How do we set it? I didn't even realize we could set the password ourselves. How do we do that?
When you set up the meeting, you can just literally click on that password field and put in anything you want.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. That's good.
Yeah. You can have set up also so that the password, this is in your settings, the password is embedded in the link.
That's what I've been using.
Students, yeah, if students click on the link, they don't need the password.
Okay, yeah, my students have all used the link.
Yeah.
That's automatic though, isn't it? You don't have to go back to settings to do that. It in the settings, it's, I mean, the meeting is already that way. And
I believe that is the default, yes.
That's what I was hoping, because I was having some trouble with that password thing. And if I clicked it wrong, okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
So you're saying it might just be simpler not to require a password.
So Zoom now, as of this week, I think, is requiring you to, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Does everyone have their picture?
Mm-hmm.
Zoom now is requiring all meetings to use either a password or a waiting room. So older meetings, I have some recurring meetings, some recurring classes that I set up back in April. It just has a big red indicator next to it because it doesn't use a waiting room or a password. It's not changing old meetings. But yeah, it can be, if students are going to use the link, they're not going to have to type in the password anyway. But, and password is a good word to teach, I suppose. But yes, that's a potential barrier. Absolutely.
I was going to say, I like that they're requiring a password or a waiting room, because I'm working with Muslim students, and the worst thing would be if someone hacked in and showed pornography. I mean, it would be very disruptive.
Yeah, that would, yeah. That would be bad in any case, certainly. Yeah, and you could, even before you could turn them on, you could decide which or both that you wanted to use. All right, we're going to go into breakout rooms, talk about these questions, and then when you come back, I'm going to ask you to put in the chat box when we're together in a room, when we're back together in this main ballroom. I'm going to ask you to put in chat box or sort of some of the main conclusions you came to or things that you talked about. All right, here we go. Hey. Hopefully nobody has whiplash.
You're all done.
All right. If you can type into chat, I will answer the question that's in chat in a little bit. But if you can go into your chat, please, and type in what would you use, what would you not use, how would you decide? Just type in sort of something that you can share with the group. We'll talk about the file sharing through chat.
Linda, why am I only seeing the gallery view, but I'm not seeing the rest of my Zoom.
If you click, you're not seeing the chats?
Mm-mm.
If
that's right.
Now can you see them?
Never mind. I always forget that I have to hover.
You can change that. You can set it so that your toolbar on the bottom is always shows, and you can do that in the application before you sign on. All right. Still a couple coming.
Yes.
All right. Sending a file through chat. Whenever you talk about sending a file, you don't know what kind of, it just has the potential for getting complicated for the student. What I do so I have not tried to actually send a file through chat. What I do when I want to share a file with students is I will upload the file into my Google Drive, or you can do it, if you're using, for example, if you're using Microsoft Word and you're using their cloud-based storage, you can do it that way too. I would set the link so that anyone with a link can view the file, and then I share that link in chat.
Mm.
So Linda, can they look at it right then when you share that link, or do they look at it after class?
They can look at it right then. They can click on the link, or just like you guys did on Monday, sometimes you have to click on the link, or else some people would have to copy that link and paste it into a browser, depending what your setup is.
Okay.
And then they can look at it there. If it's something that I want them to look at right then and there, I'll just share my screen. Right?
Yeah, because I was going to say, would they know how to, once they followed the link, would they know how to get back to the Zoom meeting?
Right. It's all about, right, teaching how much technology do you want to teach. So for looking at something together, I would share my screen. Okay, embedded passwords, yes. Sharing, a lot of questions about sharing files through chat. The doorbell. I can, right now in the middle of the meeting, I can turn my doorbell on or off. And in the, let's see, whoops, that's the wrong button. Here, sorry, I should have scrolled before showing. In the participants view, oh, this is there's a button down here. When you click on participants, there are more things down here that, and there's a 3 dots. If I click on those 3 dots, I have the option to turn on or off the doorbell. So it's in the participant. So that's something you can set when you're setting up the meeting, but you can also change during the meeting if it's driving you crazy or otherwise. Okay. Yeah, some of us would use the waiting room. None thought we would need to use the waiting room. None thought we would need to lock the meeting. A drawback of the waiting room is remembering to let people in. Yes. Once your class has started, you can turn off the waiting room, because then in the middle of your teaching, you'll get a notice that says there's someone in the waiting room. And to me, there are so many distractions that I will minimize them. And if a student is coming late, I will turn off the waiting room and just have them come in, because it's just one more thing that I have to pay attention to.
And then Linda, I'm sorry, if you do that, then do you keep the doorbell on so that you know that somebody has just joined?
You know, if it's a small class, and small maybe being anything fewer than 20 students, or, you know, you're going to see when someone joins, their video is going to pop up, right? So you'll see them, and you can decide whether you want the doorbell to alert you to that or not.
And I have a question about the waiting room.
Yeah.
How early are you in there that people would be in a waiting room waiting for you? Let's say that, like today, the meeting starts at 1. I could be in a waiting room 5 minutes before, or 10 minutes before?
How long before? That's a good question. I don't know. Certainly 20 minutes before, definitely. Okay. Yeah. If you come late and you don't have the waiting room enabled, your students can be in the classroom talking to one another or seeing one another, right? Whereas when they're in the waiting room together, it's not like the real waiting room. They can't see one another.
Okay. So you don't have to start the meeting for the waiting room to be enabled?
Correct.
Okay.
Oh, I thought it did.
When you set up the meeting, it asks you whether you want to enable join before host. So do you want to allow people into the main ballroom, into the main meeting room before you come? And that's the case. If you allow that, then students can come in and talk to one another if you are going to be a couple minutes after them.
Would you suggest doing that in a regular classroom? Letting the students come and chat before you come?
I do that. Yeah. I mean, I try to be a little bit early anyway, but I do let my students come in before I'm there.
How much earlier can they come in?
So if you, this is a kind of interesting thing about Zoom. If you have set up a recurring meeting, so you want to have your class every Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and you set that up. When you set up the meeting in time in Zoom, you click the box recurring meeting, and you get a meeting ID that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That meeting ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
What?
Really?
So for recurring meetings only, if it's not a recurring meeting, that doesn't apply. But for recurring meetings, so if you want to have a class that's Tuesdays at 9 and Saturdays at 5, you can use the same meeting ID. You can set up one meeting, click the recurring meeting box, and your meeting ID, your students don't have to know that it's always available. As long as your account is not being used for another meeting. If your account is being used for another meeting, then that meeting ID, if someone tries to log on, they'll get a message saying, sorry, your host is in a different meeting. But as long as the account is not being used, you can come in. So the question as to how far in advance of your class can they come in and chat? Well, if your account isn't being used, right.
All right.
But then, Linda, who's the host?
Nobody has host capability.
Nobody. They can just go in there and start talking to each other, but there is no host.
If you have enabled enter before host.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. If you don't want them to do that, then don't click that box to allow enter before host.
Makes sense.
And actually, if you have an account that's being used a lot, if your students decide to come in, on Tuesdays at 3, which is not when they have a meeting, it's not when they have a class, and someone else wants to use the account at that time, I'm not sure what happens. So
Linda, what you're saying is if you have class twice a week, you can just set it up for the one class as long as it's recurring?
Exactly.
Oh, who knew?
Who knew? Exactly.
Because I had set it up as 2 separate classes.
Right.
Okay.
Like this time, we kind of logged into the same ID password for this meeting, like Monday.
Right, and this one actually I set up for the workshop I did a couple weeks ago, which was Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock, and and then this meeting ID will work for 1 year beyond the last time that it's used.
Wow.
So if I want to extend and do another workshop, 3 weeks from now, I don't have to do anything to make any changes to my Zoom. It's quite the thing.
Linda?
Yes.
Brenda has raised her hand, but she's on mute.
Sorry, Rinda, did you have a question?
Yeah, just quick. So you have to have a waiting room set up before you can have enter before host, right?
You can do, ask that again.
Do you have to have waiting room set up in order to have the option of enter before host?
No, you don't. You can have enter before host, and your students will come into the main ballroom, the main classroom without you.
But so it doesn't work when you have a waiting room?
When you have a waiting room, they'll just go into the waiting room.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But they don't see each other in the waiting room.
Correct. They don't see each other in the waiting room.
Thank you.
Yeah. Several people mentioned that locking was probably unnecessary. The other thing to note about locking is that even once you have all your students in the classroom, it's so common for people to have technology problems and to have to leave and come back. And if you've locked the room, they won't be able to get back in.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay.
So you lock them.
Also, the reason people were locking rooms, Zoom has fixed that hacking problem, so people can't hack in the way that they could 2 months ago. So I think that's why locking rooms isn't quite as important now as it was, say, back in March.
Yeah, Gina, I think that's right. Okay, so, all right, more things to think about. We've talked about a lot of these, but I wanted to run through them. Students on phones, I believe we've talked about asking them to turn their phone sideways. That helps them see if you're sharing your screen, it helps them see your materials much bigger. Somebody, I can't remember who, gave me the idea of logging into your class on your phone as well as on your computer, so that at any time you can look down and see what your students are seeing, and you can try scrolling around. So, and participating in meetings on your phone is a good learning experience too, I found. Distractions, we talked about that. A lot of this technology is distractions, or people, we have an open floor plan. My desk is in an open space. And your students, will have kids at home and all that. And you just have to decide how much you're going to put up with that, how much you're just going to ask them. Often people just don't realize that we hear the ambient noise in their house. So can see if your student can go to a different room, or, make sure they know. Zoom has a capability of muting all. In the participants button at the bottom, as a host, I can mute all. And if there are a lot of distractions in people's homes, that's a very powerful thing to be able to do. Personally, I find, when your power is out and even your refrigerator isn't humming, and you didn't realize that your house used to make all these little noises, but it's just so quiet. It sounds deathly quiet. That's the way I feel about teaching with mute all. The little laughter, the little human noises that teaching on Zoom and interacting on Zoom is inhuman enough that personally, I like all those little bits of feedback, as long as it's not too distracting. So it's a decision for each person to make for himself, but that's something to think about. Communicating with students, the burden is on us. I have a class where 2 students need their messages in WhatsApp, and one of them needs by text, and occasionally by a third by email, and that's what I do. And I've had teachers who say, well, I'm going to get them to get an email account. Well, that's great. And how often are they going to check their email account? If you can get them to do it, awesome. But it's just, this is one case where I think we need to meet the students where they're at. And, as things progress, you get to know each other better. You might be able to change that. How much tech to teach students? We've talked about this. Low, I recommend starting with as low barrier as you possibly can. It's so easy for them to get scared off. Class sizes. Different people have different preferences. I have found, and other teachers I've talked to have found, that somewhere between 5 and 7 students, 4 to 7 maybe, is a nice class size. If you have an assistant, you can clearly do more than that, because you can use breakout rooms with them. Okay, more things to think about. More things to think about. We did some of this already. Thumbs up, thumbs down, right, is just easy and human. Calling on students. We've all had the experience probably where we've said, so what do you think about this? And there is silence. In video, we have even fewer cues to know whether, especially in a big class, whether someone is about to talk or not. Sometimes I'll do something like, well, what do you think, Alex, Rosemary, Bonnie? Just sort of throwing out 2 or 3 names to wake people up a little bit, communicate the expectation without putting someone on the spot who may not necessarily be ready for it. Having students call on one another is often a good way to do that. Here's for number 11, I have a good way to illustrate this. So here are these exact same things. I could have shown them to you like this.
Oh, wow.
Or I could have shown them to you like this. And this is even when we're in person, if we are presenting and there are a lot of words on the screen, people are going to be reading the words on the screen rather than listening to you. And with our students, this is even harder. So I wouldn't do it. If you really think you need to have more words on the screen, I would split this. I'd put one of these numbers on each slide so we can talk about one at a time. All right. We are, okay. So no whiteboard. So what can we do, and what have you seen me do instead of actually having markers and a whiteboard behind me?
You have a whiteboard in the Zoom, as well as you have Google Docs.
Google Docs. We will talk on Monday about the whiteboard in Zoom more, but yes, we have Google Docs, we have Zoom whiteboard.
Google Slides, is that what you said to use?
Google Slides, that's what I'm using now.
So this is called a Google Slide, which you're using now.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just like PowerPoint, except that it's online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She want to be.
So if you're used to using the regular when you switch your video all the time, this is a nice way to go.
Yeah, so this is my whiteboard. It allows me all the flexibility, and we'll talk more about, the pros and cons between using a document like Microsoft Word versus PowerPoint. But it allows me a lot of flexibility. I can make the text as big as I want. For students on phones, it's really important to make your text big and bold. And the Zoom whiteboard doesn't always allow that. But you also have, I have in the middle of classes, someone doesn't know what a raccoon is. I'll look up raccoon on my phone, get the image, and show people like that, right? Pam, actually, who's here, has done a great example of using a physical whiteboard, right? There's no reason you can't write. If you have a physical whiteboard, write on it and show students that way.
I teach children, so I do the same thing. I have a whiteboard that I just pull up really close. That's a lot smaller.
Yeah, that's better than the phone even. I've held my phone up and I see him do this.
I've also held my phone up. I do it a lot with my students because they're children and they tend to, I'll say a word or like a new food item, because sometimes we'll share cultural food items that are different. And sometimes I'll be like, a taco. And they're like, I don't know what a taco is. Like, I don't know how to describe a taco without just showing you a picture. So that helps a lot too.
Yeah, if you're going to use the traditional whiteboard, because I also use one, make sure you go into your settings and change the mirror image so that everything's not backwards to your students.
Yeah, good point. We'll talk more about that on Monday. Here, show and tell, right? I use these guys for taller and shorter and fatter and right, a lot of things that you have in your house. You know that the llama is furrier than what is that, a tomato? Furrier, because we were talking about how to make comparatives and superlatives, and lot of different options. And I wouldn't necessarily have remembered to bring those guys to class with me, so that's something I can do online more easily. They sit on my desk. Okay, I promised a sample lesson, and we just have a few minutes left, but I wanted to show you just to sort of get more creative juices going to see how things come together. This was a lesson about ED pronunciation, and we talked about first what syllables are, because that's relevant to ED pronunciation. And some of you are going to say, I don't know what the rules are about ED pronunciation. I started by asking questions, just like last time, open-ended, to elicit answers. First of all, sometimes ED adds a syllable, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it adds a D sound, sometimes it adds a T sound. And this lesson, by the way, we did over the course of 2 different hours. We had hour-long lessons in the 2 hours. Then I gave them a list of words that were pronounced in the 3 different ways. And I asked them again to try to figure out the rule. What was the rule about why? And we read through each of the columns so they could hear it, and they repeated it. We read through the columns and tried to figure out why. Then we talked about the different kinds of consonants. And in textbooks, you'll see these as voiced and unvoiced, but someone gave me the idea of calling them whispered. The unvoiced consonant was easier for students to grab onto. So we looked at our learning in terms of the 3 columns to see whether that made sense. Then I gave them a list and asked them as a class, we categorized this. And as they said, if they said claimed, when they got it right, I just typed it into my whiteboard as though I had made columns on the board. And we walked through all these. So this is controlled, right? First is the rule, eliciting the rule, then very controlled. They don't have to come up with the words themselves, and we can pronounce each of the words together. Then we read this story. This is a great story from a collection of African stories for beginners. And these stories offer audio also, so the students were able to listen to them together. But this story, I copied the story into a Google Doc, and it has lots of ED words, and the verbs that were irregular I replaced with regular ones. And we found, for each page of the story, we found the ED word, we underlined it, and we pronounced the word, and then the students took turns reading the passage. So this is, again, they have to be able to pronounce the words, but it's in a fairly controlled way. They don't have to come up with them on their own. And this story, every page has picture and more text. And it's a cute story because they tell her that the girl's not allowed to play whatever soccer, and she ends up playing and of course scoring the winning goal. And it changes the school policy. Then we opened it up. This is a little bit less controlled. They have to form their own sentences, but I'm giving them the verb. And we talked about yesterday, what did you watch? And the students took turns saying what they watched. And some of the sentences I wrote out, depending how they were doing. And the last step was watching a video. This is just a cute little animated video. It doesn't have any words. And we went into breakout rooms, each room with a teacher, and we told the story that happened on the video in the past tense. So this is very independent. They have a little bit of control in that I'm telling them exactly what I want them to think about and talk about, but they have to come up with the sentences. So hopefully through all this, and of course we got to this, and one of the students right away said, he walked across the street.
Oh, great. I love it. You walk it, you bet.
But you know what? Another student corrected him. So
Nice.
it was all good. So that was my 2-second lesson that actually took about 2 hours, and of course lots of repetition in subsequent lessons.
So with this Google box type of thing, you can type in and do it, but you can't do that on a PowerPoint.
You can do it on a PowerPoint as well. Anything, PowerPoint, Microsoft Word, Pages, numbers. If you want to do spreadsheets with your students, you're doing numbers. Google Docs, anything that you can type in, you can share your screen and have students see it. So whatever programs you're comfortable with.
Google Docs, okay.
Question about how well video transmits, and I can just show you, as long as you remember to click that little share computer audio box. So you can hear, I could maximize it too, make it full screen if I wanted to.
That's great.
Other questions?
How long did it take you to set up that whole id lesson? About how long, finding all that stuff?
Well, the first time that I taught ED pronunciation, I had to look at the rules.
Yeah,
But at this point, I've taught it a number of times, but it took the first time that I teach anything online, I have to think about.
Takes so much time.
You can't necessarily take an in-person lesson and, you know, just translate it. Sort of you have to think about how it's going to come across. So I can't tell you, I don't remember exactly, but yeah, it takes some thinking. But it
always takes thinking, but it's so much more fun to do it in person because you can change into ideas as they come. But oh well.
So in person, I had words on index cards, and I'd give once we had talked about, actually at the very beginning, I handed out the index cards and I made the 3 columns, and I gave the students tape and had them come up to the board and tape their word in the column where they thought it went.
Yeah.
And then I had them help you come up to the board and see, before I said anything, does anyone want to move anything around? So I just thought about, well, that's what I would do. What's
so much more fun.
It is much more fun, isn't it?
Yuck. Yep. Okay.
And yet in the classroom doing that, I think I'm constantly cutting things up and using index cards and little pieces of paper. But for a lot of students, if they can just focus on their screen, they can see, you know, they're not worried about the color or what someone else is thinking, or, you know, it can be,
okay.
For some students, it can be actually easier to concentrate. So yes, I will share the slides and the recording from this session. As I did last time, I will share all of them, and I will also share the slides for Monday's class. You know, I used to, as a teacher, I was worried about sharing information with students beforehand, and I don't always share everything, but I think, well, students just won't come if they get the information anyway, or I won't have a chance to set the context, or to shape their understanding, or to see the look in their eyes when they're seeing the information for the first time. And a couple of years ago, I took 3 terms of beginner Russian at PCC. And I realized that, you know, we say practice makes perfect, but then we ask students to understand something the first time we present it to them. And when I knew in advance, when I would spend time before class going over what I thought we were going to cover in the next class, then when I got to class, I had seen it once already. I could figure out what my questions were, and I could get so much more out of the class and out of the lecture. So, you know, I do think you have to be a little bit careful doing that. You don't want to bombard students. You don't want to give them lots of new information before you have presented it in class. But, you know, our students are adults. They're coming to class because they want to learn, and they're going to be paying attention. And anyway, I find that very helpful. And that's one of the reasons I'm sharing my presentations with you in advance.
Thank you.
Also, I know what I'm going to do on Monday.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank
Any
you.
questions? I will send you homework. Remember.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.